Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the Ruzovian Empire once again. We will be talking about its restoration and then its growth. As those of you know who have watched the previous video, and if you haven't seen that, go check it out. The Ruzovian Empire had grown in power before eventually being split into four after a decade-long civil war. Today we're going to be talking about the restoration and then the growth of the empire afterwards. So let's not waste any time and let's begin. So, ever since 2091 of the Third Era, the Ruzovian Empire was divided into four different states, each ruling their own respective region. They were all headed by the Octavi dynasty, but at this point the branches of the dynasty had become so distant from one another, they were essentially their own dynasties. So, the only thing that members of these dynasties had in common was their ancestors. Otherwise, they worshipped different religions, they were different races, they were of different cultures and ethnicities, and they had nothing in common other than their ancestors. So on this map, you can see what the four states looked like when the separation happened. So the kingdom of Jukaki was the name of a kingdom located on the east. In 2098, a man named Jovanian became king. In his reign, he conquered a large amount of territory to his north. In doing so, he expanded his power and became a powerful king. He led wars against Pavaro. However, he lost the Battle of Sakhalin in 2112 and was forced to give up his ambitions of expanding westward. He did defeat them eventually in Pasavar, but he wasn't able to take advantage of the victory to make gains. You can see on the east, right, you can see the map right here, the kingdom of Jukaki, which is circa 2120. Pavaro was in the middle of the four kingdoms. Its king, Arstav, would become famous for being one of the longest reigning monarchs in history. His reign overall lasted for over 150 years. He was both a mighty conqueror and a statesman, and spent much of his time reforming Pavaro, and strengthening its power. He established libraries and even universities to teach science, magic, mythology, and more, which would become a future staple for Ruzovian leaders. His conquests and lavish spending did lead to him becoming bankrupt several times in his reign, and in 2247, in the Battle of Midvas, where a lot of his soldiers deserted due to a lack of pay, this would lead to him being injured and killed. In 2112, Arstav went to war with Jukaki and defeated them in the Battle of Sakhalin. This was over disputes of a strip of land known as Golfkik, which was open to invasion. Even after the Battle of Pasavar, he was able to keep his conquest. Then afterwards, he moved westward, defeating the Ruzovian Shur in battle and conquering most of it. Then in 2140, he took advantage of the kingdom of Jukaki being destabilized and launched an invasion, conquering the entire kingdom. Jukaki, however, soon regained its independence, fighting in the north until Arstav agreed to peace, though he kept most of his conquests. However, the war with the Jukaki made him bankrupt. Thus, he freed the Ruzovian Shur in return for payment and tribute, which would only last 20 years, and he sold land to Jukaki. He also, during his reign, set up numerous colonies, reaching into the northern parts of Vanza and establishing many cities. He did this because he wanted to establish trading cities to make money out of. He was also hoping to use these as launching pads for future conquest of northern Vanza. In 2235, Arstav finally managed to gather enough funds to lead an invasion against Roruz. He sent out with several fleets and 200,000 soldiers. However, a storm had killed over 80,000 men and destroyed much of the fleet. After landing, Ma- Mavarus, Mavarus, the Ruzovian emperor, defeated him in battle and nearly captured him. Arstav eventually returned home and was eventually defeated and died in 2247 in the Battle of Midvas. And you can see on the right, this is the kingdom of Pavaro in its height of power, around 2145. So the darker blue is the kingdom of Pavaro, and then the light blue is lands that they controlled but soon lost. So in 2091, as the Ruzovian Shur separated, it was attacked by the Shur Confederation, who hoped to reconquer its lost land. In 2092, King Asvamund of the Shur defeated the Shur Confederation in battle, and soon counterattacked in the brutal 8-year-long war. In 2100, Asvamund turned the Shur Confederation into a puppet state and conquered even more land. After separating from Pavaro, the Ruzovian Shur led conquest towards the west, starting in 2160. Eventually, the Ruzovian Shur was conquered by Mavarian in 2250. 2250 of the Third Era. As you can see on this map, this is what the Ruzovian Shur looked like in 2240 of the Third Era. The yellow is the Ruzovian Shur, and then the lighter yellow color we call the Shur Confederation. After the separation of the empire, the Ruzovian Empire continued to exist, though only on the Jaw Island. At this point, it would go on to experience a civil war in 2093, and it was nearly split apart again. Though a man named Andronicus was able to become emperor and unite the remnants of the empire. Afterwards, not much happened other than the expansion of the city of Roruz. In particular, Roruz would go on to become one of the largest cities in all of Vanza, a lot of it due to the Ruzovians being able to effectively deal with pirates that once plagued the empire. In 2198, the Ruzovians also led a conquest towards the west, founding the city of Adu, which would become an important trade city. It also conquered the neighboring island of Evronik. In 2237, only 2 years after Arstav's attempted invasion, Malvarian ascended the throne. He had great ambitions and saw Pavaro weakening. Thus, in 2247, he launched an invasion against Pavaro. He famously defeated Arstav in the Battle of Midvas, causing the death of Arstav, which allowed for him to conquer the entire kingdom by 2249. He then launched an attack against the Dukaki, and with the Shur helped conquer the Ruzovian Shur in 2250. Mavarian had a harder time against the Dukaki, but was eventually able to subdue them by 2254. Afterwards, he quickly moved soldiers and occupied much of Pavaran colony, and finally united the empire, which was divided for over 150 years. So some changes that happened. So after Mavarian reunited the Ruzovian Empire, he made a number of changes. He forced the Octavie family to return to Roruz and convert to the Ruzov culture and marry those who the emperor or other close members of the family deemed necessary. He prevented the Octavie family from marrying outside of Roruz and the Ruzov culture. Rozu culture, I mean. He established a stable currency, and I just realized it says a stabilized currently. That's funny. He established a stable currency and a standing army. He then also established a proper line of succession. So, if an heirless emperor died, the throne would go to his brothers. If he had no brothers, then it would go to one of his cousins. This would be voted on by some of the elites in Roruz, and thus whoever was voted upon would gain the title. This would prevent largely, I say largely for a reason, civil wars. So after the conquest, Malvarian had the task of reconstructing and ensuring the empire's future would be bright. He largely succeeded, and by the end of his reign in 2271, the empire was recovering quickly. Now at this point, Ruse was by far the largest city, which was now being a hub of trade for merchants near and far. Many lands far away from the Ruzovian capital would be placed under high autonomy, allowing for local rulers to lead in many places in a lot of ways. This was to prevent rebellions and to ensure the loyalty of outer provinces. These reforms and more allowed for the empire to begin the recovery and the ability to launch conquest. Do note that even though the ability to get these areas to have high autonomy is a good thing, preventing them from rebelling, it also prevented them from actually collecting quite a bit of taxes. It also prevented them from using these colonies and provinces to their benefit. But I suppose not having rebellions in the first place is suitable. Being a bit weird. After Malvarian's death, his son, Remel III, took the throne. He faced down a rebellion in Ruse by the nobles who attempted to usurp him. He then, in response, reduced the power of the nobility and placed high taxes on those who had rebelled. He faced opposition, but overall the nobles simply didn't have any more power to do anything. His reign set the idea that the emperor was a powerful figure, both in theory and in practice. He also led conquest to the west before dying of a fever in 2283. Now, the reason why Remel III is important is because he establishes the power of the emperor as nearly absolute. So, after his sudden death, Remel's son, Macarenius II, took the throne. He was able to conquer a lot of land, finally being able to bring Ruzovian control over the Grand River, which is the giant river in Vanza. This held many important cities, which were over time would slowly become more directly controlled by Ruse. He was able to do this quite easily, defeating any opposition, but he also spared many of those who were his enemies, and thus made it so that many of his enemies would not be so fearful. In fact, most of the people he fought against would be able to keep their positions even if they resisted. This did lead to certain rulers who were disloyal, but overall it was a benefit for the Ruzovian Empire. He also subjugated the kings of Gakrin, which was raiding the Ruzovian territory. He also, most famously, subjugated the king of a powerful kingdom, Estavale, into a tributary state of the emperor. Now, this was important because Estavale controlled a lot of territory and it controlled land outside of Adu. In return for protecting the Adu and some of the outer regions of the empire, Estavale would be a tribute of the Ruzovian emperor. And the Ruzovian emperor would, in return, protect Estavale from potentially any invasions, destruction, and civil war. After the reign of Macarenius, the Ruzovian Empire continued to prosper. Its large population, combined with its laws, which were considered fair by many people, meant that it was largely peaceful. So some things that were going on were that cities were well guarded and crime was low. Inflation was very low, and entire cities were being built. Art flourished, and the population expanded and grew rapidly. Even though the empire would see days where it was much larger, many consider this period to be the golden age of the Ruzovian Empire. Also during this time, the Ruzovians began to conquer much of the coast of Vanza and further into Vanza. This golden age would be said to last for several centuries, where art, philosophy, and everything flourished. So by 2500, yeah, most of Vanza was firmly under the control of the Ruzovian Empire or influenced in some way. It ran from the mainland and launched notable settlements on the islands surrounding it. It began to dominate trade, to the point in which it even was outcompeting against the Ruthenians, who were known as masters of the sea. Its merchants began to travel across continents and trade on other continents en masse, telling stories of the great Ruzovian Empire, conquerors of a continent much like the Nakarthans, and tales of a peaceful, prosperous land, a paradise on earth, as many called it. As you can see, this is the map of what the Ruzovian Empire looked like in 2500 of the Third Era. In 2521 of the Third Era, a merchant named Amirius gathered an army of 20,000 men and defeated a local duke in the east of Ari. He then became duke and eventually agreed to be a Ruzovian vassal. Though many didn't know it at the time, this would permanently change world history. As the Ruzovians, they wouldn't stop at conquering one continent. And as you can see on this map, this is the location of the duchy. This would begin a new period for the Ruzovian Empire, and in fact, it's also considered the beginning of a new era, the Fourth Era. The Fourth Era, so much shorter than the Third, would actually be, in a way, much more important. But that, for now, is going to be it. So, as you all know, I really do appreciate each and every one of you who spends a small part of their day to watch my videos. If you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe and comment and check out my community posts that I post every now and again. And that's it. I hope each and every one of you has a good day or night, and I'll see you all another time.